All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am here to talk about the upcoming lunar eclipse. This is a lunar eclipse in Leo on January 21st. And this is the eclipse map. The red zone is where you'll see the entire eclipse visible from start to end. So that's pretty much all of North America. I think that's Greenland, all of Central and South America. Just this whole region. It's hitting us pretty hard. It's hitting the United States pretty damn hard, and then I guess some of the Scandinavian countries, Britain, and maybe the top of Russia. So it's pretty much missing like Africa, most of Europe, Saudi Arabia, India, and these other countries in here. So that's just good to know. Where the eclipse will affect, it will be relevant for all of us, and so on. But supposedly it's most powerful for those places where it can be seen fully, which makes sense because even though the eclipse is somewhat of a mathematical phenomenon, it's much more of a visual phenomenon. And, that's probably how animals are going to react to it the most as well, if it's actually visible there and so on. I like to tell a story where the last time there was a major lunar eclipse in Leo a couple years back, or a year back, I forget, that major one that everybody was, pretty crazy about. My friend's chickens went back inside their coop. They huddled around, during the day when the eclipse was happening. They huddled in a circle, very, very strangely, and then went back into their coop feeling it was night and so on. So just, always keep that in mind. This is considered a blood moon, which according to the dictionary here on Google, the phenomenon whereby the moon in a total eclipse appears reddish in color as it is illuminated by sunlight filtered and refracted by the Earth's atmosphere. So that's very interesting because in a sense it's almost like how we're relating to the moon, because it's the Earth's atmosphere that's refracting that sunlight, And I guess it's always that case with different colored moons. That would just make sense. That would stand to reason. So I just wanted to say a little bit about that. And, I think it's fascinating that it's a blood moon occurring in Leo and that it's with Rahu, or the dragon's head. It's not with his tail, Ketu. And that's so there's some very fiery, fierce symbolism and imagery there already, right? And red, before I get into interpreting the chart, it's important to understand that red is a very, very, very powerful color and vibration. It is basically a more palatable version of black. And what black represents is the primordial void, the supreme Tao, consciousness, Parabrahman, God, whatever you want to call it. It's basically unbounded supreme. So black is not really a digestible energy for most of us. Therefore, red is esoterically that energy, but in a more digestible or palatable form. It's still not very digestible for most people, I don't think. And I've certainly had experiences with it to speak to that. In the area where I live, there's a place called White Mesa, and basically you get to this point where, and the top is white, but you get to this point where there's this huge valley or chasm, and it is just blood deep red, and it has these natural pyramids of red sand, and it is, to stare into that canyon is so intense. I mean, it's kind of spooky almost to stare into it. So red symbolizes, a purification, primal action, will. I think that's the most important keyword for red is will, just sheer will, right? And will is just the focalization of energies around a fixed point or center. That's really all will is. So that's why will more readily relates to the sun, not Mars. Mars is more like the active willpower, so to speak, moving outward toward a given goal, but sun is the pure will. And will is neither good nor bad. It's just a purely neutral thing, but that's what focalizes consciousness toward a given end. Okay, so now that I've gotten that introduction out of the way, let's get to interpreting this chart. So first thing is we see that there are 4 planets in fire signs. So we've got a preponderance of fire here, very, very intense, especially given the blood moon and the stuff I talked about with red, right? Fire is archetypally red, orange, and, you know, has some blue in it too. But we tend to think of fire as like a sort of a pure representation of willpower and energy. So of course that theme is very much to the forefront. And what does that mean, practically speaking? That means basically the theme of breaking free of any and all limitations, either violently, aggressively, or even possibly harmoniously, but it's very much a breaking free of things. There's not much room for emotions during this eclipse period because there's no water signs, right? There's no planets in water signs. Rahu, the north node, is in a water sign, and this is, of course, not really a great thing for the nodes to a node to be in any sign, technically speaking. I mean, I should rephrase that. It's not that it's not great. It's just that it doesn't create any sort of consistency or foundation for what that sign or that element represents. And in this case, emotionally speaking, right, the moon is separating from Rahu. The sun is separating from Ketu. So they're separating from. So it's almost like there's some violent, volatile upheaval happening in the emotional life, you know, generically, collectively, or whatever, and a sort of a radically being thrown out of what was comfortable. So being forced out of one's comfort zone could be a theme here very easily, and it's probably going to happen very suddenly if it does take place for certain of you in your own life. Again, with all this stuff, with these general readings I do or anyone else does that you watch, you always want to see if this stuff is also a theme in your own chart. So like if this eclipse, right, by degree, forget about the sign boundaries, if the sun, moon, and nodes, right, are close to a really personal point in your chart, like the ascendant, the moon, the sun, even possibly like the midheaven or the lot of fortune, to name kind of the big ones, right, then some of this stuff could be a bigger theme in your life. Otherwise, you may see it more in people around you and so on. I'm going to bring in the Sabian symbols, which I haven't really been doing, but I love the Sabian symbols. And for those of you who don't know what that is, I recommend researching it, looking into it. You can find the whole version by Dane Rudyard on this website, Mindfire here. And this is really a gem of an astrological text. But the symbol for Leo 1, right, because you always round up with the Sabian symbols, so the moon is on 51 degrees, or 51 minutes. Yeah, 51 minutes for the sun and the moon there. So basically that means that we round up because 0 to 1 is the first degree, and that's how these symbols are listed. So Leo 1, blood rushes to a man's head as his vital energies are mobilized under the spur of ambition. And Rudyard's keynote is an interruption of biopsychic energies into the ego-controlled field of consciousness. But real quick, I just want to turn to the fact that this isn't the original symbol. Apparently the original symbol was described as a case of apoplexy, which is basically, from my understanding, like an aneurysm or something like that, like some sort of brain trauma. So we have this idea of like energy dramatically and perhaps violently rushing into the head. And so this really fits well with all our super fiery symbolism, and of course with the dragon's head here, right? We even have like a literal head symbolism with that dragon's head as far as astrology is concerned. And so there's kind of this this theme of devouring things and devouring them without any regard for how it affects other people and whatnot. You know, it's in a sense a desire to find some sort of truth or find something that's more, I don't know, just like more visceral, more real perhaps, but at the cost of perhaps one's emotional security and safety because of that Cancer position. So that's kind of, that's kind of general, I know, but that's kind of the vibe I'm getting at the moment. I want to see what is the Atmakaraka, the soul planet. Soul planet's Jupiter in Sagittarius. So again, just more fiery emphasis, right? A lot more of that happening. The sun and moon by 12th part are going to be just in the same signs. Okay, they're going to be in Leo and Aquarius. So I'm going to just go ahead and interpret them as though that they're in the 1st and 7th house, even though they will always be like that for every, full moon, but they won't always be like that for 12th part. So that's kind of my rationale. And I'm sticking to it for now. Okay. So that does emphasize the 1st, 7th house axis, the axis of consciousness, the axis of understanding oneself in relationship to others. So there's kind of a sharp sense of separation happening there. This is not really a great chart for relationships, in my opinion, even though Venus sits in the 5th house with Jupiter. If you notice, Saturn, the 7th lord, is in the 6th house, conjoin the former lunation, which I also have a video on, right? The new moon that was in Capricorn. And to me, this is kind of a theme of taking time to recollect oneself after a relationship that has not really worked out or something like that. This is not a loving sort of situation. And while Venus with Jupiter can bring lots of great things for like love and relationship, we also have to remember that Jupiter, in a sense, is not really auspicious for marriage and relationship, in the sense of the interaction factor, right? Jupiter is impersonal, Jupiter is power, Jupiter is expansion, and these planets are in a fire sign, which is very much about the individual subjectivity, right? The fire signs, the air signs, which we only have one planet in an air sign, right? The sun, and it's not really that powerful, right? So like we already talked about how we don't have much water, right? So we don't have much happening in terms of like feelings and intersubjective states and like being very introverted, perhaps. This is not a time for introverts, right? Time for more extroverts. But the thing is, it's about forging one's path. And since we basically have like no air, if we ignore the sun. So it's not really a period for relationships. It's not really a period to build lasting relationships or even to necessarily try to fix relationships head on. It's a period to explore individualism more profoundly and deeply, and to rediscover one's spark. For those of you that are going to be more profoundly affected by this, right, it's not a period of time in which you're going to necessarily have too much say in how things unfold, unless you've been already working towards breaking free of something emotionally stifling and negative. And what I mean by that is this is like Moon emerging from a conjunction with Rahu and the Leo, just the whole vibe of this chart, the blood rushing to the head aneurysm symbol. I mean, it's a sudden change. It's a sudden schism or fracture in the continuity of one's life. Like what one thought one was is potentially going to be no longer. Again, especially if these themes are already being emphasized in your birth chart and with your particular, time lords, transits, progressions, and all that stuff, right? Which is not something I can speak to in a general video. For those of you who are interested in a more personalized reading for stuff like this, right, where we can take a deeper look, I offer that on my website, which you can check out at any time. But continuing on, for those of you who want the general sort of scoop, another thing that's not really good for relationship is the fact that Saturn is conjoined Venus and Jupiter by Anticia, which are shadow points. If you don't know what Anticia are, please search them. This is how you spell that word. And you can visit my friend Kate Petty's website, Ambient Astrology. She has an excellent article on those. You can also visit skyscript.co.uk and read more about Anticia. But they are pretty damn close. If we look at Jupiter, 14 Capricorn, Venus, 15 Capricorn, and Saturn is right there at, Saturn is, his position is shown here. Saturn is at 1344. So very, very close, right? And, you know, vice versa, right? Saturn's Anticia is 16 Sag. So Saturn is the sixth lord and the seventh lord. When Saturn is the sixth lord and the seventh lord, there is a potential for some sort of sudden interruption to marriage and whatnot for a variety of reasons, which I won't list right now because I don't want to scare anybody who has a Leo ascendant. But, you know, we have this theme of interruptions in relationships, being blocked in attaining one's desired goal, especially toward that kind of end, right? And it's kind of like a power struggle almost to me, because the fifth house is very much the house of personal power and creative risk, right? So Saturn coming in and being also the sixth lord is kind of, in a sense, putting a damper on some of these very powerful and expansive energies. When both the benefics, Venus and Jupiter, come together like this, right, in a very auspicious house, the fifth house, symbolizing great luck and good fortune, right, then there's a lot of potential for just those things, right? Great luck and good fortune. And in this case, an expansion of, you know, influence and pleasure and so on. But because they're in Sagittarius, though they are in the bounds of Venus, interestingly enough, right? So there's kind of a Venusian undertone here, definitely. So that expansion of pleasure still applies, but this is very much also a great situation that could emphasize the seeking a broader, deeper understanding of the principles that govern life, but through Venusian factors, right? So like love, romance, and sexuality, but stifled because Saturn is there, right? And Saturn being with that most recent lunation is also kind of like us being stuck in the past. And they're both in Venus's bounds as well. Again, very, very interesting to see this Venus bound theme coming through. So there's kind of this being potentially being stuck on what happened in the past. And I think we also kind of have that with the sun in the 7th by 12th part, right? Along with K2, though K2's in the 6th, is kind of this potential to be, a lot of energy is being sucked away from people due to some kind of selfishness around partnerships, something kind of like volatile or even totalitarian within partnerships and relationships and so on. If that makes any sort of sense, those are just the words that are coming into my head at the moment. But yeah, back to this Sagittarius thing, you know, this is like, there's something kind of innocent about it, but then there's also this sort of like worrisome or guilt factor interfering with this expansion of self and risk and creativity. I think that generically speaking, Venus and Sagittarius wants to understand things in terms of human relationship and interaction and sexuality, right? There's like, this is like the desire to really understand what sex is and where sex fits in a religious context and that sort of a thing. It can definitely mean power in relationship too with Jupiter there, but I'd say a power struggle because of Saturn's influence once again. Super fascinating to me is that K2 sits with Mercury. K2 sits with Mercury. So what does that mean? That means that potentially during this period of time where the eclipse is influencing, you know, which will be it'd be roughly 2 weeks, right, till the next lunation, the next new moon. And we give a few days before as well, wiggle room and whatnot. I mean, to be honest, I don't really know full well when the eclipse energy is the most powerful. Obviously, it's the most powerful when it's happening, but I just mean, I'm not doing mundane astrology here. I'm not trying to predict the fate of nations and stuff. So I don't really know quite what the deal with that is. Although I will say real quickly that this eclipse is hitting Donald Trump's first house and in a sense his 12th house as well, since it's so close, right? Since that moon is right on the cusp there, and the North Node is in his 12th house. The North Node is very close to his Saturn and Venus, I believe. Venus rules his 10th house. So this could again be. It's hard for me to tell. This could be not such a great thing for Donald Trump, especially with the way things are going. This could shake some things up. I mean, that's all I'll say about that. I don't really know what's going to happen with him, but I would just I would keep an eye on him, especially since the eclipse is visible in North America, fully visible. It could be, again, it could be just a sudden shit hitting the fan for him, which really wouldn't be surprising at all, given what's going on and whatnot. I think there's a potential too for like a lot of rebellious behavior here. There's a lot of courage with Mars in the it's in the 9th house, actually. Sorry, I thought it was the 3rd for a second. I got confused, but it is aspecting that 3rd house, and the Lord is with Jupiter in a fire sign, right, trine to Mars. So I think there's a lot of potential for courage and stuff here, and that could we could easily see some kinds of that courage could be something that we see amongst the people, right? It could be, who knows, in the U.S., it could be related to the government workers being, out of their job currently and that sort of thing. We might see some kind of, again, I'm going to use that word, schism or fracturing or something. We do have Mars also squaring Saturn. Again, not great for partnerships, not great for relationships, and not great for negotiations when it comes to the political arena. Really not great stuff. Metaphorically or psychologically, this kind of aspect is, okay, there's reception. Mars receives Saturn. Okay, but still, it's very intense aspect, and Mars is in the sign of Saturn's fall as well, which is not necessarily great for this aspect. I think that this is psychologically a battle between basically Mars, meaning, well, obviously, sorry, it's a battle between like what we want to do, right? Like our freedom, or our sense of like movement and just attaining things and taking initiative versus like the status quo, or AKA institutions, AKA Saturn as our psychological ability to maintain some sort of structure or stricture, right? Stricture is a great word for Saturn, right? So Saturn helps us maintain our autonomy and that sort of a thing. It gives us a certain amount of consistency, but Mars wants to break free of that, at least temporarily, right? So we do see the ending of relationships kind of violently and volatilely in a sense, but also a dwelling upon them in the past and whatnot. Okay, sorry. So I got totally away from what I was originally talking about, which was Mercury with Ketu. What does that mean? Well, it's potentially a kind of deep-seated and perhaps idiotic rejection of reason. On the other hand, it could be a radical rejection or transfiguration of people's ideas about social institutions, laws, and the government, which are all very Saturnic Capricorn kinds of things. It's also possible that the kind of the results of one's speech and ideas will be more powerfully felt, there will be more intense consequences to the things people say and the communication interchanges they have during this period of time as well. So that's kind of the basic on that. In the past, I've gone through like every house and tried to say something. I'm not as interested in doing that right now for this video. I think it's interesting to do that, but it's just not something I don't want to go down that rabbit hole at the moment. So I am gonna take a look at some more modern things with relationship to this eclipse chart. And I will say the only other thing that's like really striking to me is basically just the fact that Mars is in a very powerful position here in the 9th house, I think. Again, there have been this theme in the past few lunations I've done of like breaking free of one's belief system or something, or forging ahead in one's own way. So this could be a major split with a guru, an ideology, a professor, university, stuff like that. And we also have this Raj Yoga of Venus and Jupiter in the 5th here, though it's kind of interfered by that Saturn Antisha, in my opinion. So again, the question, I guess the way to summarize all that is the question becomes like, what is greatness for you? What does it mean to be personally great, to be empowered, and to be successful, right? Does it mean kind of blindly neglecting your past, or blindly sort of breaking free of your past and just plunging into the unknown? Does it mean fighting and struggling with others just because you are projecting your own insecurities and limitations onto others, right? Blaming others for what you yourself are just doing to yourself. These are kinds of good questions to ask with this eclipse, I think. And yeah, we had mentioned Jupiter was the Atmakaraka, and I was wrong about that. I am sorry. It's Mercury that is the Atmakaraka. I just totally spaced that at the moment. I don't oftentimes look at these charts too intensely before I make the video. I like things to be as raw and live as possible if I can. So please forgive me for that. Mercury is the Atmakaraka, which again emphasizes that theme of Mercury with Ketu and communication, and sort of like it can mean sacrificing or rejecting all like logical thought processes and investigation, right? Sort of maybe giving up the mind, maybe ignorantly rejecting certain tenets of reason and good judgment that could really get people into trouble later on. To me, it's not really a great thing that I'm seeing, or that I'm sensing from it. I'm sensing that it's going to really screw up communication for people, and that it's going to likely have the effect of just muddying the waters of being objective and having discrimination and stuff like that. So something to be aware of, that there may be a lot of projection happening during this eclipse period, that we all may have a tendency to project very unrealistic and negative things onto other people in the world, and sort of get caught up in that and have no objectivity and be kind of emotionally batshit crazy for a time. I just wanted to check a couple other things. Oh yeah, Mars by Antisha is square to that Jupiter Venus. See, he's at his Antisha's there on this axis of Virgo Pisces at 16. And I think that was pretty much it. That was kind of the big thing that I saw. I'm not going to mess with the 12th parts right now. But yeah, it's again, this is very much, like I said, it looks good at the beginning, but it's sort of a power struggle. And the question is like, do you really need as much money and stuff and things like that as you have, right? If you are trying to explore the philosophical meanings of dominion, sexuality, diplomacy, and stuff like that, you will perhaps be doing it under some sort of extreme crisis and battle and limitation kind of deal. So this is the chart with the modern planets and whatnot. Neptune, actually, let me get the, I put in some other aspects. I like to use the eighth harmonic aspect. I think it's a very useful aspect because I studied some Uranian astrology, and I can't say enough good things about Uranian astrology, but I'm not really messing around with it as much these days. But I still use these aspects. So we see that Sun is semi-square Venus and Moon is sexquiquadrate Venus. Very important. And same for Jupiter, right? It's also that same thing is happening. We also find Venus apparently sexquiquadrate to Uranus. We find Venus square to Neptune. We find Jupiter square to Neptune. Yeah, Jupiter would be as well. But we find Neptune also semi-square and sexquiquadrate the Sun and Moon. So, oh, yeah. Okay, so now I'm seeing it. I didn't see this before. What's kind of happening here is we're basically getting a very powerful kite configuration. So Sun semi-square these planets, Sun semi-square Neptune, and then these points all sexquiquadrate the Moon, right, at the apex. So this is one of the most intense configurations that modern astrology talks about. And I'm sorry, Venus is not square Uranus. That doesn't make sense. What Moon is square Uranus widely, right? I mean, out of sign, but the Trans-Saturnians don't really care about sign boundaries. What was that? What was I seeing? Oh, that Uranus is sexquiquadrate Venus. Interesting. Well, we got quite a few semi-squares and sexquiquadrates and a lot of squares too going on, you know? So this all just kind of, it reinforces what I've been saying all along, that there's just a lot of really intense, dramatic energy that wants to break free in general, that's like pent up, that's being resisted, that we've been resisting in our own lives in various ways and whatnot, that just wants to totally break free. And so it, this is negatively a mental breakdown. Absolutely, because it's just so much stress on the mind and the emotions there hitting the Moon like that. Positively, it is a total purification, but again, very sudden and potentially sort of traumatic, right? It's a purification by fire is what it is. This is a true purification by fire. And I think collectively, we're going to see a lot of people undergoing very stressful times and whatnot surrounding this eclipse. Whether they, make it out of it or not will, of course, just depend on individual horoscopic factors. I hope people do well with it and whatnot. And if you could just give me a second, I have to plug in my charger into the wall and then into the computer. So I am having a very sudden little crisis here as I am talking about an eclipse chart that has to do with a very sudden crisis, a sudden bubbling and boiling over of things that have been repressed, that have not quite been dealt with or acknowledged, right? So it's an omen for everything I'm talking about here. At least that's how I take it. The key things involved here are really like Moon, Jupiter, and Neptune, because the Sun and the Moon are sort of just a conduit for those. And so with Moon, Jupiter, and Neptune, we get the possibility, in my opinion, for sort of like a mob mentality, like a madness that sort of just like trickles out and kind of just infects people in a way. A lot of disinformation, a lot of thinking that you are, people thinking what they are doing is for the greater good. But it just actually being like some sort of weird narcissistic fantasy of like saving the world, no matter how like volatile or violent the ideologies you're promoting are. And it's funny because I have been researching and looking a lot into Jordan Peterson because I think the Jordan Peterson phenomenon is fascinating. I'm really not much of a fan of Jordan Peterson, but I think that his ideology and the way he delivers things and the way he stirs people up, this very much reminds me of that, very much so. And yeah, you know, people are free to disagree with that, but you know, whatever. This video is not about that. It's just something I wanted to mention. So I think the takeaway from this is that there's frustration, there's struggle, there is you know, the question of what does it mean to be a I forget what I said earlier, but I'm going to rephrase it. What does it mean to be a creative, passionate, and empowered individual for you, right? And what is it that you or we have been fighting, been struggling against unconsciously, emotionally? What have we been suppressing and so on that is now wanting to break out and break free and get us completely out of our comfort zone, especially with that Uranus aspect to the moon. Uranus wants to get us completely out of our comfort zone. But the Neptune-Moon combination, Neptune-Uranus-Moon combination, all in these hard aspects, right? Fourth harmonic, eighth harmonic. This is potentially a very volatile thing because on the one hand, Uranus wants to like totally break free of any and all limitations and transcend them. But Neptune kind of, you know, it's about dissolution and universalization in consciousness. So there's like a radical rebelliousness that wants also some kind of universalization and transcendence and escapism. So it's sort of like a neurotic, narcissistic, possibly violent and volatile escapist mentality, I guess you could say. I don't know specifically what that'll bring. I'm not really too fond of finding the specific stuff in these charts. I'm more interested in looking at them and, you know, giving some kind of commentary that can hopefully aid people in making sense of what's going on in their own lives and giving them something to work with. So I strive to be more general than specific in that sense. I'm not trying to predict specific world events again, you know, like I've said before. But the positive side of this Uranus-Neptune heavy influence on the moon is basically seeing beyond your limitations, you know, a shattering of your definitions and your attachments that allows you to see the light, that allows you to glimpse something more profound about the nature of being and consciousness that is beyond the mind, that is beyond the sense of being I, separate from other people, and so on. So there's a tremendous amount of stress happening here. And just remember that no matter how crazy things get, right, it is, of course, always a tremendous opportunity to radically reinvent oneself, to break free of really severe and stifling limitations, really by being innocent. I think that's it, especially with Leo and any of and Aries to a certain degree. It's being innocent, right? Aquarius Leo is always about the individual versus the collective. You know, how do we fit into the group? How do we fit into the world? You know, and for most people, that's an ideological thing, right? They align with others who have a similar ideological agenda to them, right? Sun in Aquarius and Ketu. But that's being left behind by Moon Rahu and Moon in Leo, right? It's now time to ask, what really makes me a free individual? How can I think freely? How can I reinvent myself? How can I let go of this desire for good things and fortune, which is only bringing me suffering and misery and really isn't meant for me. Because again, Saturn just wants us to get back to our roots and so on. Jupiter wants to expand us and give us power, and they are very complementary. But Venus kind of gets in there and maybe mucks things up a bit, because Venus is not impersonal. Venus is very personal. It's the desire for specific things that you know will bring you a specific type of pleasure. You always want that same kind of ice cream, right? And you start to rely on it. So every day when you get home from work, you eat that ice cream and you just keep eating it and eating it every day, because you want that same thrill, right? It's something you can expect. So on a certain level, maybe if we took Venus out of the equation and maybe if we took Mars out of the equation, we'd have a nice thing happening between dignified Saturn and dignified Jupiter, potentially producing actually a lot of focalized power that propels things in the social sphere. But that's not really what's happening here. Venus and Mars need to be there because for whatever reason, we need to not necessarily break free of collective factors, and we don't necessarily also need to suppress or go completely beyond the importance of our everyday personal life and interactions. It's more about they're getting put into the same pot, right? And they're ingredients that shouldn't be in the same pot, right? Or jar. They're like oil and water, which don't mix. So the question becomes about what works for you in the social career field versus what works for you in your own personal life and private sphere of being. Because we're really looking at getting away, I think, from trying to have it all and instead taking an adventure into the unknown, right? The moon still has to traverse all of Leo, right? So the moon is really getting out of its comfort zone, so to speak, right? And it's not going to aspect any planets. This is the beautiful thing, right? It's not going to aspect any planets for a good 13 degrees. I guess it'll aspect Mars unless something's going retrograde in here, which is always possible, but I haven't looked into that. But but it's 13, but at least 12, 13 degrees, right? It's not going to aspect anything before that Mars. So it's heading towards Mars, but it's a dignified Mars and it's by a trine. So this in a sense is like really grabbing hold of that newness and that freedom that Mars offers, really just plunging into the conflict and the unknown potentially as a way to affect some kind of catharsis or purification of self. Something's happening and it's a crisis is happening, and the first thing people are grabbing hold of is Mars, right? Mars, initiative, action, and the power and energy that comes from that, the revitalization of the being that comes from just taking a risk, just taking a plunge, right? And, people might bruise themselves and get a little hurt, but, maybe not too horribly because it's just a trine. But the point is like, it's just really like, it's just that the energy is just wanting to escape and it's just wanting to be pure and just, fuck everything else. And we're just going to do this. We're just going to, whatever it is we want to do, whatever, we're taking that risk, we're taking that plunge, we're jumping off the cliff into the water. And that's kind of the vibe I get, and people might not get their heads screwed on completely straight until, the moon connects with, something a little more stabilizing, maybe like Jupiter, like Jupiter and Venus perhaps. But, it's definitely taking that plunge, taking that risk, and just a radical breaking free of the known, Freedom from the Known, a good book by Jiddu Krishnamurti, which I definitely recommend to most people around this eclipse and so on and so forth. So, that was one hell of a journey to interpret this. I hope that this video was helpful. Much and more could be said, as always, but I think I've said as much as I can bear to say at the moment. So please, please, please Have a great eclipse experience. Contemplate this stuff if it touched you in any way. And if you liked this video, please share it, like it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and visit my website for personalized readings and more. All right. Thanks, folks.